My daughter looked at the hands that once covered her face from a blast of burning steam and told me they were too ugly for her wedding photographs. She said it quietly at first, as if whispering cruelty somehow made it kinder. Then she pointed across the table at her stepfather and said his hands would look better when the photographer captured someone placing hers into the groom's. My ex-wife nodded, like they had already discussed it. The groom's mother lowered her eyes into her wine glass. My daughter added, "You can still come, Dad. We'll put you somewhere in the back where you're comfortable." I had already paid nearly $60,000 toward that wedding. Another $72,000 was scheduled to leave my account the following Monday. I did not yell, throw my glass, or remind everyone that the scars embarrassing her were the reason she still had an unscarred face. I folded my napkin, walked out of the restaurant, and for the first time in 20 years, stopped paying for a daughter who had learned to love everything my hands provided, except the hands themselves. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I was 54 when that happened, and I had lived outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin my entire life. I am not rich in the way people imagine rich men. I never owned a yacht, never joined a country club, and never wore a watch expensive enough to require explaining. I spent 32 years working around industrial equipment, first as a maintenance technician, and later as a plant operations supervisor for a company that manufactured commercial heating systems. I lived in a modest brick ranch in Wauwatosa, drove a 7-year-old Ford F-150, and still owned boots older than some marriages. But I had money because after the accident that changed my life, I received a settlement large enough to make different choices. I chose almost none of them for myself. Most of that money sat for years in investments and savings accounts with one person in mind: my daughter, Olivia. That is why the restaurant conversation hurt in a way insults normally cannot. She was not embarrassed by hands that had failed her. She was embarrassed by the physical evidence of what I had done for her. Olivia was 8 years old the day my hands became what they are now. Back then, she called them daddy hands. She would fit both of hers around one of mine when we crossed a parking lot. Every Saturday morning, I picked her up from the little yellow house where she lived with her mother, Rachel, and we had a routine so predictable the employees at Gilles Frozen Custard knew us by sight. Olivia always ordered vanilla with rainbow sprinkles, even though there were 20 better choices. I told her that every week. She told me consistency was a virtue, which was a sentence she had clearly stolen from an adult. We would eat outside, then stop at the hardware store, or walk through the park. Sometimes I had to stop by the plant because someone had called in sick or a machine needed inspection. Olivia loved it there. The guys on second shift knew her. She wore oversized safety glasses and carried a clipboard because my coworker Marcus once told her important people carried clipboards. She believed him. The accident happened during one of those Saturday stops. A contractor had replaced a pressure valve incorrectly on an industrial steam testing line. I did not know that then. All I knew was that Olivia was sitting at a break room table drawing a dog when I heard metal scream. There are sounds your body understands before your brain does. I turned, saw a pipe connection twist, and watched a white cloud explode across the room. Superheated steam and chemical-treated water came through that line hard enough to strip paint. Olivia was directly in its path. I do not remember deciding to move. One second I was near the maintenance desk. The next I was over my daughter with my back turned toward the pipe and my arms around her head. My hands were the only part of me I could get between her face and the spray. The pain arrived after the noise. People describe burns as hot. That word is too gentle. Hot as coffee. Hot as summer pavement. This felt like my skin had stopped belonging to me. Marcus shut the emergency valve, while another man dragged Olivia away. She did not have one burn. Not one. I had severe burns across both hands, wrists, forearms, and part of my shoulder. I spent weeks in the hospital, months in therapy, and almost a year learning how to perform small movements without wanting to scream. There were skin grafts, compression sleeves, surgeries, splints, exercises with tiny rubber bands, and mornings when buttoning a shirt took 20 minutes. My right hand never recovered full movement. The skin across my knuckles tightened into pale ridges. 2 fingers curl slightly inward. My left palm looks as though someone spilled melted wax over it and allowed it to harden. Olivia visited the hospital twice before Rachel stopped bringing her. The first time, my daughter climbed carefully onto the bed and asked whether my hands would grow back. I laughed even though laughing hurt. These are still my hands. She touched one finger gently. They look like superhero hands. I carried that sentence for years. Rachel carried something else. 4 months after the accident, while my hands were still wrapped every day, She told me she wanted a divorce. She said bringing Olivia into an industrial plant had been irresponsible. I reminded her that employees' families had been allowed in the administrative area for years, and that the investigation found the equipment failure resulted from neglected safety procedures. She said none of that changed the fact that Olivia had almost been hurt because she was with me. She wasn't hurt because I was there, I said. Rachel stared at my bandages and answered, "That's not how I see it." It took me years to understand that some people choose the version of a story that protects them from uncomfortable gratitude. If I had saved Olivia through courage, Rachel had to admit the husband she was leaving had done something extraordinary. If I was reckless, she could leave without wrestling with that. So recklessness became the family story. I never attacked Rachel in front of Olivia. That was probably my greatest mistake. I thought protecting my daughter from conflict meant allowing one version of history to dominate. Every other weekend, I received an Olivia who loved me, but slowly asked different questions. At 10, she asked why I had taken her somewhere dangerous. At 12, she said mom told her I had ignored safety rules. At 14, she said her stepfather, Stephen Caldwell, believed a responsible parent would never have put her in that position. Each time, I explained gently without making Rachel the villain. I showed Olivia an old newspaper clipping once, but she barely looked at it. Children do not compare evidence when one parent has controlled the emotional weather for years. They absorb the climate. Stephen entered Olivia's life when she was 15. He was the opposite of me in every visible way. He worked in commercial real estate, wore tailored shirts, leased German cars, and had soft hands that had never spent 10 hours inside a mechanical room. I did not dislike him because of that. Honest work comes in many forms. What bothered me was the way he performed importance. He corrected restaurant servers, referred to ordinary houses as assets, and treated every conversation as if somebody might be grading his status. Rachel loved the upgrade. Olivia admired him. Stephen took her to charity galas, taught her which restaurants required reservations months ahead, and introduced her to people whose last names appeared on buildings. Meanwhile, I took her fishing, fixed her car, and sat through dance recitals with fingers that ached whenever the weather changed. At 16, she stopped spending full weekends with me because Stephen could take her to better events. At 17, she began introducing him as her bonus dad. I smiled when I heard it because I wanted her to have more people who loved her, not fewer. What I did not realize was that Stephen was not adding himself to her life. He was teaching her that I belonged to an earlier, less presentable version of it. The settlement from my workplace accident came after nearly 4 years of investigations and negotiations. I will not bury you in details. What matters is that the company admitted serious failures, and I received enough money that I could have stopped working at 40. I did not. Work gave structure to a body that felt permanently changed. I paid medical expenses, bought my modest house, and created a long-term account for Olivia. I told myself the money was the one good thing that could come from what happened. It covered part of her college tuition. It paid for a semester abroad in Florence. When she needed help with her first apartment, I covered the security deposit. When she turned 25, I paid off the remaining balance on her student loans as my birthday gift. She cried and hugged me. I remember thinking maybe the distance between us was finally closing. Then she met Carter Livingston. Carter was not cruel. That matters. He came from a wealthy family in Lake Geneva, but unlike his parents, he never treated me strangely. He worked as an architect, loved old buildings, and once spent 40 minutes in my garage asking about the woodworking tools I had learned to use after leaving industrial maintenance. I liked him. His parents, Ellen and Charles Livingston, were more formal. They belonged to clubs with waiting lists, owned a summer property on the lake, and considered weddings a form of public diplomacy. Rachel and Stephen immediately transformed themselves around them. Rachel bought new clothes. Stephen began discussing vineyards as though he had recently discovered grapes. Olivia changed too. She worried about invitations, linens, table shapes, calligraphy, and whether the rehearsal dinner should communicate understated elegance or warm sophistication. I asked what either phrase meant. She did not laugh. That should have warned me. The original wedding budget was reasonable by Livingston standards and absurd by mine. Olivia called me one evening and asked whether I would contribute. I told her I had already planned to. The accident settlement account still had money reserved for major milestones. I offered $75,000. She cried and told me I was the best father in the world. 3 weeks later, the venue changed. Guest count increased. There was now a string quartet, custom floral installation, upgraded wine package, welcome dinner, farewell brunch, professional content creator, and something called a champagne escort wall that I still do not understand. Rachel said the Livingston family expected a certain standard. Stephen repeatedly reminded me that weddings were investments in relationships. I increased my contribution because I told myself this was the final large thing I would ever need to give my daughter. By the time we sat at the menu tasting in October, I had paid almost $60,000, with another $72,000 scheduled for final venue and vendor balances. I had also promised $30,000 toward a future home after the wedding. Nobody forced me. That is important. I gave because I loved Olivia, and because somewhere inside me still lived the father who believed enough generosity could erase years of distance. The tasting took place at an estate venue outside Lake Geneva. The dining room overlooked autumn trees and water that looked expensive, simply because nobody around it seemed worried about money. Rachel sat beside Stephen. Carter sat beside Olivia. Ellen and Charles Livingston sat opposite them. I was placed near the end because Stephen had apparently been handling father of the bride logistics. I should have heard the warning in that phrase. We discussed salmon, short ribs, and whether truffle mashed potatoes were too heavy for May. Then Olivia looked at my right hand around my water glass. She had seen that hand thousands of times, but now she looked at it through the eyes of a wedding photographer. "Dad, there's one thing we need to talk about." The table quieted. Her voice became soft and rehearsed. "The photographer does a lot of close-ups during the processional. Hands, rings, that kind of thing." I waited. "And your hands are very noticeable." Rachel stared at her plate. Stephen leaned back. Carter looked confused. Olivia continued. "They're scarred. I don't mean that badly. It's just reality. And the pictures will be forever." My chest tightened. "Okay." She took that as permission to continue. "Stephen has agreed to walk me down the aisle." I looked at Stephen. For the first time in our 20-year acquaintance, he seemed genuinely embarrassed. Olivia hurried on. "He just fits the atmosphere better. He knows the Livingstons. He'll be wearing the right tux. And his hands photograph well." She actually said that, his hands photograph well. Ellen Livingston put down her fork. Carter whispered, "Liv, maybe we should talk about this privately." Olivia shook her head. "We already decided. Dad can still attend, obviously. We'll put him somewhere comfortable toward the back, so he doesn't feel like everyone's staring." I looked down at the hands she wanted hidden. The fingers were bent because they had once closed around an 8-year-old girl's head while a pipe exploded above her. A photographer might see scars. I saw a Saturday morning, steam, screaming, and a small body walking away untouched. I looked at Rachel. She finally met my eyes. There was no surprise in her face. She had known. Maybe she had helped write the speech. I folded my napkin once. "I understand." Olivia looked relieved. That relief hurt more than the decision. She believed I would accept it because I had accepted everything else. I stood. Carter said my name. I told him it was fine. Then I walked out. The drive home took almost 2 hours. I kept the radio off. Every few miles, I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. I had spent decades refusing to be ashamed of them. One sentence from my daughter made me inspect them like a defect. When I reached Wauwatosa, I went into the second bedroom I used as a home office and opened an old cardboard box of photographs. Near the top was Olivia at 8 outside the frozen custard stand, vanilla dripping down her wrist, both hands wrapped around my scar-free right hand. Another photo had been taken in the hospital. My arms were bandaged, and Olivia sat beside me, holding up a handwritten sign, "My dad saved me." I had forgotten the sign existed. On the back, Marcus had written the date. I sat on the floor holding that photograph for a long time. Around 7, my phone rang. The wedding coordinator said the scheduled payment authorization required confirmation because the total had changed again. Rachel had told her to call me. I asked how much remained. $72,418. "Do not process it." The coordinator hesitated. I told her I was withdrawing from any unpaid wedding expenses and that all existing deposits could remain. I was not demanding a refund. I was simply finished funding new balances. Then I called the florist and catering coordinator, whose future installments were being charged directly to my account, and gave the same instruction. I did not cancel Olivia's wedding. I stopped paying for it. There is a difference people understand very quickly when the bill reaches them. Olivia called the next morning before 7. Dad, what did you do? Not are you okay? Not I'm sorry. What did you do? I told her. She said vendors were calling Rachel. The venue required the remaining balance within 10 days. You promised. I promised to help pay for my daughter's wedding. I am your daughter. Yesterday you decided I was visually inconvenient to the role. She started crying. This is childish. You're punishing me because Stephen is walking me down the aisle. No, I'm declining to pay $72,000 for an event where I've been told my hands are too embarrassing to appear near you. She accused me of using money to control her. That sentence had Rachel's fingerprints all over it. Control would be telling you whom to marry or who must walk you down the aisle. You can make every wedding decision you want. I can decide what I fund. She said the Livingstons would think our family could not afford the wedding. Then scale it down. We can't scale it down now. That sounds like something adults planning a wedding should have considered before assuming someone else's money had no feelings attached. She went silent. Then she said, "You always make everything about what happened to you." That sentence nearly brought me back to the accident room. Olivia, the scars are what happened to me. You are what survived. I ended the call. By afternoon, Rachel had posted a carefully worded message online about fathers who use money to punish daughters for choosing a loving stepfather. No names, but enough details that everyone knew. Stephen shared it. Olivia did not, but she did not ask them to remove it. Friends from the old neighborhood sent screenshots. Some people called me jealous. Others said a father should give without conditions. Marcus called after seeing the post. He had witnessed the accident. "You want me to say something?" he asked. "No." "Dan, she's telling people you're bitter because another man gets the aisle." "Let them. You saved that girl's face with your hands." "I know." He was quiet, then said, "Make sure you keep knowing." I wrote those words on a sticky note and placed it above my desk. The Livingstons did something nobody expected. Ellen called me directly. She apologized for the tasting. She said she and Charles had not known the story behind my injuries. Carter told us Olivia said it was a workplace accident caused by unsafe choices. I closed my eyes. Rachel's version had survived another generation. Ellen continued. Charles looked it up. There is an article. The old newspaper report included statements from investigators and a photograph of me leaving the hospital. The headline said, "Milwaukee father shields daughter during plant failure." Ellen asked whether I wanted her to confront anyone. I told her no. "This is between me and Olivia." She said something I did not expect. "Perhaps, but character becomes everyone's concern before a marriage." I did not like the sound of that. I still did not want the wedding destroyed. I wanted my dignity back. 2 weeks later, Rachel invited me to Thanksgiving. She said Olivia was devastated, vendors were demanding payment, and the family needed one peaceful meal to reset. I declined. Then Olivia called herself. She said Carter's parents had reduced their wedding contribution until the conflict was resolved. She insisted nobody was asking me for money at Thanksgiving. "Grandma Alice will be there," she added. My mother was 81 and rarely traveled. That was the hook, and they knew it. I agreed to attend for 2 hours with 3 conditions. No discussion of wedding money, no pressure about the aisle, and no photographs posted as proof that everything was fine. Olivia said yes immediately. Thanksgiving took place at Rachel and Stephen's large colonial in Brookfield. I arrived with a pecan pie from my mother's favorite bakery. Stephen opened the door wearing a cashmere sweater and the expression of a man greeting an auditor. Rachel hugged me too long. Olivia stood near the fireplace in a cream dress. For half a second, she looked like the child from the custard shop photograph. Then she said, "Thanks for coming," as though I were an employee who had reconsidered a shift. Grandma Alice hugged me with both hands around my damaged fingers. She always did that. She never avoided them. "Still the best hands in Wisconsin," she whispered. I almost lost composure. The dining room was filled with family, including Carter and his parents. That surprised me. I assumed Thanksgiving was only ours. Rachel said the Livingstons had been invited weeks earlier. The table arrangement told its own story. Stephen sat near the head beside Olivia. My place was near a sideboard, between Uncle Raymond and a doorway to the kitchen. Grandma Alice looked at the cards, moved hers beside mine, and said she preferred the end. Nobody argued with an 81-year-old widow holding a cane. Dinner began politely. Football, weather, wedding planning without numbers. Then Rachel made a toast. She said blended families required grace and that real fathers are the men who step forward, not necessarily the ones who share blood. Stephen lowered his eyes modestly. Olivia raised her glass. I did not. Carter noticed. Ellen Livingston definitely noticed. Under my plate was an envelope. I felt it before dessert. I pulled it out and looked at Olivia. Her face went pale. Rachel said, "Just read it before reacting." Inside was a revised wedding budget and a one-page statement they wanted me to sign. It said I was voluntarily releasing the remaining funds as a gift, understood that Stephen would perform father of the bride duties, and wished to avoid those duties because of physical discomfort resulting from an old workplace injury. They wanted my money and a written lie explaining why I would sit in the back. I placed the paper on the table. Which part of no wedding discussion was confusing? Rachel hissed. "Daniel, not here." "You put it under my plate here," Olivia said. "Dad, please. This is just so everyone can move forward." "Everyone?" I looked around the table. "Or you?" Stephen finally spoke. "Dan, I think you're taking the wording personally." I laughed once. "It is a statement about me. That tends to make things personal." He said the wedding had grown beyond what Olivia could manage, and that families helped each other. "I already paid nearly $60,000. Rachel snapped. "Money is the only thing you ever know how to give." Grandma Alice put down her fork. "That is enough, Rachel." My mother rarely raised her voice. Rachel flushed. Olivia began crying and said the wedding might be canceled because of me. Carter said quietly, "The wedding is not being canceled because of him." Olivia turned toward him. He continued, "My parents paused part of their contribution because nobody explained why your father was being treated like a problem." Rachel said Carter did not understand the history. Ellen replied, "We understand more than you think." Charles Livingston took out his phone, opened the newspaper archive, and placed it on the table. The headline was visible from where I sat. "Father Shields' 8-year-old daughter from Steam Blast." Olivia stared at it. Rachel's face changed. Charles asked, "Is this inaccurate?" Nobody answered. He read one line aloud, not dramatically. Investigators credited Daniel Whitmore's immediate action with preventing serious injury to his daughter. Olivia's breathing changed. She looked at my hands, not the quick, embarrassed glance from the tasting. She actually looked. Rachel said the newspaper never reported that I should not have brought a child near the plant. Marcus's old statement was quoted farther down. Families were permitted in designated administrative areas. Olivia had been in one. The failed valve was outside the scheduled replacement window. The accident was not caused by me. Carter asked Olivia, "Did you know this?" She whispered, "Mom said Dad ignored a restricted area rule." "There was no restricted area violation," I said. Olivia looked at Rachel. "You told me he caused it." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I was terrified. You almost died. So you blamed him?" Carter asked. "He brought her there." "And saved her," Grandma Alice said. Rachel shouted that nobody understood what it was like to sit in a hospital wondering whether your child would survive. I answered more softly, "I was in that hospital too, Rachel. I was the one in surgery." The table went silent. Olivia stared at the scars she had asked a photographer to hide. She asked why I never forced her to read the report. "Because I thought you should not have to choose between your parents. So you let me believe you were reckless?" "I told you what happened every time you asked. I refused to call your mother a liar," Grandma Alice murmured. "Sometimes silence protects the wrong person." She was right. Olivia began crying harder. She reached for my hand, then stopped before touching it. The hesitation hurt, but this time it was not disgust. It was shame. "Dad, I didn't know." I looked at the paper beneath my plate. "You knew enough to ask me to hide." Rachel said we could resolve everything privately if I just signed and released the wedding money. That sentence destroyed the fragile honesty forming in the room. Olivia turned toward her mother. "Stop." Rachel blinked. Olivia repeated it. "Stop talking about the money." Stephen said everyone was emotional. Olivia looked at him too. "Did you know Dad paid $60,000 already?" Stephen said he understood there had been contributions. "Did you know Mom wanted him to sign this statement?" He did not answer quickly enough. Olivia pushed away from the table. Carter followed her into the hallway. Rachel began blaming me for ruining Thanksgiving. I picked up the false statement, folded it once, and placed it beside her plate. "You ruined Thanksgiving when you used dinner as a collection agency." Grandma Alice covered a smile. I helped my mother with her coat, kissed her cheek, and left. I did not follow Olivia. For once, I let someone else sit with discomfort instead of rushing to repair it. The wedding did not happen in May. That was not my decision. Carter postponed it after telling Olivia he needed to understand whether she wanted a marriage or a social production. Olivia blamed me for approximately 48 hours. Then she stopped calling. Rachel sent messages accusing me of turning Carter's family against them. Stephen said I had humiliated him. I blocked both numbers for a month. The quiet was painful, but it was clean. I spent Christmas with Grandma Alice, Marcus, his wife, and 3 guys from my old shift. Nobody asked me to pay for anything except my portion of takeout. Marcus gave me a framed copy of the newspaper article. I almost refused it. Then I hung it in my office. Not because I wanted to live inside the accident, but because I was finished allowing someone else's shame to define what my scars meant. In January, I did something I should have done 20 years earlier. I spent part of the settlement money on myself. Nothing outrageous. I bought a small cabin on 3 wooded acres west of Madison, with a workshop large enough for woodworking and windows facing a frozen pond. For decades, I had lived as though enjoying the settlement would prove Rachel right about me. Suddenly, that seemed absurd. Pain did not become morally pure because I refused every comfort it purchased. I kept enough money reserved for Olivia's future, but I changed my rules. There would be no automatic wedding payout, no house money released because someone expected it, and no funding routed through Rachel or Stephen. If Olivia wanted help someday, she could ask me directly, explain the plan, and accept that my answer might be no. Love would no longer be measured by how quickly I opened an account. In March, Olivia came to the cabin alone. No Rachel, no Stephen, no Carter. She stood on the porch holding a paper bag from Gilles frozen custard, even though we were almost an hour from the Milwaukee location. Vanilla. Rainbow sprinkles. Of course. I let her in. She looked around the unfinished workshop and said the place smelled like the garage from when she was little. Then she started crying before we had even sat down. I remember more than I thought, she said. I waited. Not the accident exactly. Pieces. The noise. You over me. Somebody carrying me outside. Your hands wrapped around my head. She looked at them. Mom told me so many times that you caused it that I stopped trusting what I remembered. I did not rescue her from the guilt. She needed to speak. She apologized for the tasting, for the back row comment, for allowing Stephen to take the role, and for caring more about photographs than what the scars represented. Then she said, I don't want the wedding money. That surprised me. Carter and I are still together, but if we get married, it'll be smaller. We're paying for most of it ourselves. She slid a small envelope toward me. Inside was a photograph from when she was 8, sitting on my hospital bed holding the sign, My Dad Saved Me. She had written something on the back. I forgot what your hands meant because forgetting made my life easier. I read the sentence twice. She asked whether I could forgive her. Forgiveness is easier than trust, I said. Trust takes time. She nodded. I know. And Rachel? Olivia looked down. She said they were speaking less because every conversation about the accident turned into Rachel defending the lie instead of acknowledging it. Stephen had also admitted he enjoyed replacing me at family events because it made him feel important. I thought he stepped up because you didn't, Olivia said. Now I realize you were standing there the whole time. We just kept moving you backward. That sentence nearly broke me. We ate melting custard at the small workshop table. She reached across it and put both hands around my right hand. The position was awkward because my fingers do not bend normally. She adjusted without comment. These are still daddy hands, she whispered. 20 years disappeared for 1 second. Then they returned, because life does not heal like movies. There was no music, no perfect reunion, and no promise that everything would return to normal. Normal had been the problem. We began something smaller. Olivia called once a week. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I texted that I was busy and called later. She visited Grandma Alice without turning it into a photograph. She stopped using Stephen as a messenger. When Rachel posted a throwback Mother's Day collage, calling herself the parent who had protected Olivia through everything, Olivia did not fight publicly. She simply did not share it. That was enough. Carter eventually proposed again, privately, on a trail near Devil's Lake. They chose a small September wedding at a restored barn outside Madison with fewer than 80 guests. Olivia called and asked one question. Dad, would you walk me down the aisle if I'm lucky enough for you to say yes? I did not answer immediately. She waited. No guilt, no speech, no mention of money. Yes, I said, but I'm wearing my own hands. She laughed and cried at the same time. That's the whole point. I contributed $10,000 to the wedding because I wanted to, not because anyone calculated it into the budget. Carter's parents contributed something similar. Olivia and Carter covered the rest. Rachel attended. Stephen attended too, though he sat with her instead of near the front. Before the ceremony, the photographer asked whether Olivia wanted any special detail shots. She said yes. The first photograph she requested was her left hand resting inside both of mine. No hiding. No angle designed to minimize scars. My twisted fingers, pale grafted skin, her wedding ring, all of it centered in the frame. Then Olivia asked the photographer to take another photograph of the old hospital picture beside our hands. I told her that was probably excessive. She said, "I spent enough years hiding the truth. Let me be excessive once." When the doors opened, she looped her arm through mine. Halfway down the aisle, she squeezed my hand. Not my arm, my hand. Carter waited at the end. No one stared at the scars, or maybe they did. I no longer cared. At the reception, Olivia gave a short toast. She did not expose Rachel or turn family history into entertainment. She said, "My father taught me something I learned far later than I should have. Sometimes the parts of people we are taught to see as damaged are the evidence of what they gave to keep us whole." She looked at me. I looked down because Daniel Whitmore apparently does cry at weddings, even if he does not cry in traffic. After the ceremony, Rachel approached me alone. She said she had been wrong about the accident and admitted she had repeated her version so many times that eventually she believed it. She asked whether we could put the past behind us for Olivia's sake. "I can stop fighting with you," I said. "That does not mean I pretend it never happened." She called that unforgiving. I told her forgiveness was not historical amnesia. We have not spoken much since. Stephen sent me one Christmas card. I did not respond. Some relationships do not require dramatic endings. They simply stop receiving maintenance. That was the deeper lesson my daughter's wedding taught me. For most of my life, I believed love meant continuing to give after gratitude disappeared. I thought fathers proved themselves by absorbing disrespect and remaining available. I spent money because money was easier than asking whether Olivia still respected me. I accepted the back row because confrontation felt more dangerous than invisibility. But a boundary is not revenge simply because people were benefiting from its absence. I did not ruin Olivia's first wedding plan. I stopped financing a celebration that required me to hide the physical evidence of my love. I did not turn Carter against her. I stepped aside and let him see how she responded when appearances became more important than people. I did not force Rachel's lie into the light. She carried it into a room where the truth was finally sitting at the same table. Most importantly, I did not demand that Olivia crawl back forever. I allowed her apology to begin a new relationship without pretending it erased the old one. Today, I am 56. I work less. The cabin workshop is finished. Marcus visits twice a month, mostly because he claims my coffee is terrible and needs supervision. Grandma Alice keeps asking when I am going to meet a nice woman, and I keep reminding her that she is not allowed to arrange my life at 82. Olivia and Carter visit some Sundays. They are saving for a house. I have not offered to buy one. They have not asked. That may be the healthiest financial conversation my daughter and I have ever had. The framed wedding photograph sits above my workbench. Her hand is inside mine. The scars are sharp, visible, impossible to crop out without destroying the image. Beside it hangs the newspaper article Marcus gave me. For 20 years, I treated these hands like the price of loving my daughter. Now, I understand they are also a reminder that love should not require endless self-erasure after the emergency is over. I would still step in front of that steam tomorrow. 1,000,000 times. Saving Olivia was never the mistake. The mistake was believing that because I had sacrificed once, I was required to keep sacrificing forever just to prove the first sacrifice was real. So tell me honestly, if the child you once permanently scarred yourself to save told you those scars were too ugly for their wedding photographs while still expecting you to pay for the wedding, would you keep the peace and write the check? Or would you walk away until they learn the difference between loving what you provide and respecting the person who provided it?